both are hesitation waltzers in Ottawa and Washington, so that they start addressing the problem because they've got the overall jurisdiction. Other fields, we can have agreements. We've had quite a few over the years, either bilateral or sometimes more than bilateral, without having to go through the canal of federal authorities. It all depends on your jurisdiction. But basically, what I go along with what was said by the governor and by Premier Hatfield, that, you know, there's a lot of talk in the world about a north-south dialogue, so-called, which is global, and like all global things is rather, well, to say the least, not going ahead very fast. But we have a north-south dialogue here, and a north-south set of links that go way back to old friendships, even old battles that now are historical memories, like going up the Kennebec to, you know, conquer Quebec once again. All of that is part of our ties. For instance, pretty soon, a substantial part of Quebec is going to invade New England again during the summer, in spite of the exchange rate, including yours truly, if I may say so. And, you know, all of that, plus so many economic links, plus exchanges, and the fact that the GATT agreements are going to bring us closer to something like a common market pretty soon, all of that makes it very important, not just interesting, not just on us. It is basic that we have social exchanges because we get to know each other, as was said before, and the better you know each other, the more productive eventually are the relationships. But there are concrete things that we address, and I think usefully.
We want to talk about.
John, I want to pursue this the acid rain question just for a moment. Governor Brennan, do you have any sense that that they're listening in Washington? I know Senator Mitchell has a bill in. Congressman.
Well, they're hard of hearing sometimes.
Well, is anything happening down there?
Well, I think that they're going to have to start listening. I think it's just irresponsible of the United States to be doing what they're doing to probably the best neighbor and friend we have in this world. I mean, I feel deeply what we're doing is nothing more than dumping garbage on a neighbor's lawn. That is socially irresponsible. The United States government ought to address it. It's embarrassing the fact that they haven't. Now, whether they will or they won't, I can assure you that the New England governors and these premiers are really unanimous in the view that something ought to be done. I'm delighted with what Senator Mitchell is trying to do. Even in our own New England Governors Conference, we endorsed another strong resolution. So we're going to work on it. Can you make anybody listen? I guess you can't, but you can continue to put the pressure on.
You end up being a lobbying effort then.
Well, that's one of the things we do as a governor or a premier. You know, we have to be advocates before our respective federal governments.
Governor Gallen, the problem that was alluded to in the conference about accepting electricity from Quebec has come up before. I understand that your Utilities Commission is sort of holding hostage Phase 2. Is that a fair characterization for your commission?
No, no, it's not a fair characterization. The commission. Phase 2, a decision was made by the Public Utility Commission quite a while back that they wanted to see Phase 1 come online before more investments were being made in Phase 2. And they also wanted to see other utilities that throughout New England had made commitments to buy shares in Public Service Company for Seabrook, follow through on that commitment. They also recognize that we also need power. We should be looking, and I support very strongly, alternate sources of energy, and hydro is one of them. Because you could find out tomorrow that maybe the Mideast oil is shut off, or Northern African oil is shut off, or South American oil is going to be shut off. And I say the steps we take now in providing these alternatives is the best action we can take. And there again, I don't think that would have come about, these negotiations, unless you had the New England governors sitting down with the premiers of the eastern provinces of Canada.
Governor, is the acceptance of Phase 2 dependent per se on the other New England utilities buying shares of Seabrook?
No, no. I think the need is going to have to be shown, but what the Public Utility Commission is saying, get Phase 1 built, and then move on to Phase 2. And it's basically not so much need as it is the economic situation with the investors in the company itself.
Well, as I understand it, one of the outcomes of this conference, or one of the things that's been in the press, is that you people have power to sell in a substantial amount. Is that an accurate assessment?
You mean the New Brunswick Electric Power Commission?
Yes.
We are selling it.
And it will be increasing, as I understand
Yes.
it.
Premier Hatfield mentioned also the discovery of large amounts of oil and natural gas, and also you had a report about tidal power.
Premier Buchanan.
I'm sorry, Premier Buchanan. Could you elaborate on the tidal power? Is this something very important for Maine and the whole New England seaboard?
I think it came as maybe a bit of surprise to some people here that we do have a tidal power plant under construction in Annapolis Royal, Nova Scotia. I know the governor of Rhode Island indicated a bit of surprise at that, and others. That plant will be on stream in June of 1983, and it will be the first of about 128 tidal power units, which we hope by 1995 will be sending a lot of electricity here into the northeastern United States. And we've made allowances in all of our studies for the kinds of power that Premier Levesque has mentioned that is now and will continue to come into the area from Quebec. So tidal power is now a reality. It is under construction, and we hope that the financing will be arranged for the very large project in the Minas Basin, commencing in the next 3 years and completing sometime around 1995. The same with the natural gas transmission facilities. We hope that by the end of this year, a determination will be made on the Sable Island structures where there have been substantial reserves proven up of natural gas, and that gas would be used in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, but the surplus would be exported into the New England states and as far as Rhode Island.
Premier, what about the question that was raised last summer by some scientists in Maine about the effect on the tides of the Minas Basin project? Have your people satisfied themselves that that's not a problem?
Yes, we have, and that, unfortunately, it's like a lot of other things, it's been exaggerated. Sure, there may be, at very high tidal situations, an increase of maybe a half an inch to an inch, but that's about all. The stories about 16 inches and 20 inches have been highly exaggerated.
So, anyway, there are precedents in Europe that
Sure.
have shown, on a smaller scale, I think, that it's not just feasible.
La Paz in France.
So the substantive decision to go ahead with those projects has been made. Now it's a question of finance.
It's a matter now of financing, and it's a matter of some more studies being made as to the exact location. And of course, the markets are very important. We believe the markets are going to be there between 1990 and the year 2000. All of our studies indicate that, particularly in the New England area and New York, there will be a need for our electricity. After all, the total output of the tidal power plant will be about 4,500 megawatts, which is less than 5% of the capacity needs of the entire New England power pool in Pasney, so that there's a lot of electricity going to be needed in the 1990s.
Governor Brennan, you have requested funds, I believe, from some source to study this tidal question. Are you satisfied on this question?
Well, right now we have Bigelow Laboratory working on it. They've gotten good cooperation with Tidal Power Corporation of Nova Scotia. Certainly we were concerned when the talk was about a change in the tide of 16 or 18 inches and the consequences it would have. I think at this meeting last year, Premier Buchanan's deputy or one of his assistant deputies pretty much assured us that if there was going to be something that would be greatly detrimental to the state of Maine, that they just wouldn't do it. And knowing the people of Nova Scotia and the Premier, I'm sure they wouldn't. So we've been concerned. We've been looking at it. We know that we don't have the monies to do the thorough study now. They're reviewing some of the other studies that have been done. I've met with the colonel from the Corps of Engineers, and we've urged them, if it looks like the major ones are going to take place in regard to tidal studies, tidal development, that we do the big, thorough study to try to get the assurance that it won't have any really serious detrimental consequences to Maine or the New England states.
Angus, one of the things that bothers a lot of people about importation of electricity, it raises red flags around the country oftentimes because of the Arab oil crisis, et cetera. And I'm just wondering if Governor Gallen and Governor Brennan can comment on this perhaps hole that we may be getting ourselves into. Now, we're all friends, we're neighbors, and nothing else is going to go wrong, et cetera, but what about importation of foreign energy? Governor Gallen?
I feel that, and I've stated for a considerable length of time, that here we are on the North American continent, and we have great supplies in Mexico. We have tremendous assets in Canada. We have tremendous assets ourselves in the United States. And I think we should be getting ourselves into a position where we can sit down, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and work out reciprocal agreements either in the private sector or in the public sector, So we can be independent of any other breakdown in the oil supply system worldwide.
From my standpoint, if we're going to import energy, Canada may have its intramural problems, but I have great confidence in Canada and the provinces. And again, as I go there, I feel I'm at home. I don't feel I'm in a foreign country. If I go to Israel or over in the Mideast, I know I'm in another country. If I were down South America, I knew I'd be in another country. If we're an independent region, we happen to have lines that demark us between Canada and the United States, but as the Premier Levesque just mentioned, in a few weeks you'll see a good part of his province right down here, and you'll see me up there in the winter.
Yeah, I was thinking about the reverse action, you know, because with the exchange rate, may I invite all of you to make a very profitable trip this summer to Quebec.
I make a pilgrimage every winter up there to win a carnival to Quebec, and we're treated just like we're part of the family.
Premier?
I was just going to say ditto on that, Mr. Levesque, that certainly as far as Nova Scotia is concerned, we have about 1 million tourists come in, and a lot of those tourists from the New England states and the Northeast, and with our exchange rates, we want everybody to come to Nova Scotia this year.
Just by the way, to emphasize the importance, the concrete importance sometimes, more often than some people think of such conferences, the question, as far as Quebec is concerned, and the New England states, of substantial exchanges in electric power was first raised at the Governors and Premiers Conference in Vergennes, in Vermont, 2 years ago. And today, in Rockport in Maine, we can report, I think, rather substantial progress.
Premier?
Well, the fact of the matter is that the United States is dependent for its energy sources from offshore. And the alternative to that is for the United States to start to generate all of their own energy within the United States. I think that there is genuine safety and security for a very long time to come for another reason. We are dependent on the United States in the area of national defense. I think that will assure, and to draw a comparison, I think that we could, too, in Canada, build up our own independent defense capacity. But why bother? Why do it? Why spend that money? I think it's a good trade for Canada to supply energy to the United States in return for what the United States is doing in the area of national defense.
Along with...
Does that mean we get the power free?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there's a bottom line somewhere. But there's some other power that we haven't talked about, Point Lepreau and other nuclear projects. Are they potential exporters to the U.S.?
We have signed contracts with the utilities in New England, Maine and Massachusetts, for quantities of power. We've got 200 or 300 approved now for export by the National Energy Board, and we've got contracts for the rest of them.
I'd like to change the subject just a little bit. We did talk about acid rain a few minutes ago, and I wonder, Premier Levesque, maybe you can answer this. I understand that Canada has made an offer to reduce its emissions by 50% up around 1990 or so. Is that contingent on what the United States does?
Well, that's where you have a sort of you go first, you go first. Nothing has been firmed up that I know of, but we do know that the danger is becoming more and more obvious, and the results are there. Some lakes are dying. It's true in New England, it's true in Quebec. Pollution, continental pollution, comes to us from all over the place because prevailing winds bring it this way, which means that, and it eventually can affect the soil itself very seriously. That's known. It's not necessarily as well researched as the question of lakes or rivers. But all of it means that there is a very difficult trade-off. We know why people hesitate, because there's a trade-off there between, and it's a classic one, between economic development or economic activity with its fallouts, positive and negative, and environment, which is the basis of everything else. And that trade-off we know is hard to face. But you know, years ago we used to have sewers that went freely into rivers, and we found out that we were poisoning our rivers through more or less open sewers. So we had to address that. It was damn expensive because we waited too long. But now everybody agrees that purification, control of anything that has to do with sewage or things like that in your own environment, you have to address that and clean up your act. Well, the same applies in a different way to this continental long-range pollution, and we'll have to do it.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we can change the subjects again a little bit towards other disputes, and they're not major disputes, but they are irritants to Maine and perhaps to other surrounding areas. One of the things that is international in scope is going to be coming up for resolution hopefully in August before the World Court in The Hague, and that is the international boundary. There's been considerable investigation and research into where that should go. And I'm just wondering if there was any discussion of that today, or is it all moot because it's going before the courts? Premier Buchanan?
Well, I suppose Nova Scotia is one of the prime players in this. No, it wasn't discussed at this conference. Maybe at a future conference it will be discussed, but I'm not going to get into the positions that we take and that Canada takes, although the position we take is the right position, of course.
We have a conflict here.
Yeah. I really don't think the conflict is as great as has been made out, and we're hoping that the matter will be resolved quickly by the World Court. As you may recall, there was a resolution of the problem, and then some problems developed in Washington where it was quite obvious
This
it
was the
wasn't going to
fishing
be passed
treaty?
by the Senate, and it resulted in going to the World Court. But it is a matter that's got to be resolved. It's one of those disputes between our two countries that's extremely important to the fishing industry primarily, but also lurking in the background, of course, are the oil companies and the oil and gas industry.
George's
But
Bank.
primarily it is a matter now, really the fishing industry, and it's most unfortunate, you know, because our fishermen, Nova Scotian fishermen and New England fishermen, for over 100 years got along very well, and they actually moved back and forth across this imaginary line without any difficulty, I suppose, until the politicians got involved. And now the matter is in big dispute. But again, we hope it will be resolved, and we have our line and you have your line, and I hope somewhere in between we can resolve the matter.
Compromise you're looking for. Governor Brennan, they're right and Maine and the rest of the states are wrong.
Well, I'm sure they're right, but no, that's something that we've really put on the back burner since it's gone before the court at The Hague, and it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. This whole idea of international courts of jurisprudence and how it works out, I'm sort of fascinated by it. I appreciate what Premier Buchanan has said, that, you know, both sides have gotten along in view of just an imaginary line. We have it closer to home with Governor Gallen, our lobster war down there. There are people and their predecessors, generations back, always got along pretty well, and we seem to be doing it again pretty well. So I'm not so sure that any great damage is going to come out of it, but I think I ought to state for the record clearly, Premier Buchanan, we're right.
Governor Gallen, the lobster war was brought up, and that was going to be the next question. Is that on the back burner now, or are things resolved?
We put it on the back burner once Governor Brennan gave me back the 48 traps that were confiscated. We had the issue all resolved after a short boat ride, but several other people got involved in it, and it took roughly a couple of years to get those traps. But we also passed legislation establishing a committee of people from New Hampshire to sit down with people from Maine, and reasonable people will resolve any conflict that might exist. But it's been very quiet since I've been governor, and, except for that one issue, and it's been very quiet since Governor Brennan has been governor.
What Governor Gallen is saying, he and I could resolve it, but a couple of lawyers got involved on both sides, so it was dragged out for months and months and months, and it became quite a product.
Lobster remains available.
Nobody cares outside of New England.
Where he's caught. What about the potato question up north? That's another irritant. Is there any resolution moving, or is that another area where we've got to deal with our federal government?
Certainly the federal government is really the critical player. As you know, we've had that problem for a few years, and Vice President Mondale got involved in it with the previous administration. Recently there were meetings with farmers and Vice President Bush, but this is a problem that really has to be resolved between the national governments. It's a difficult one. I know, you know, some of the provinces have their problems, but because we in Maine feel that we're dealing with a difficult competitive situation whereby they're subsidized and our people really aren't. But it wasn't resolved here today. It wasn't taken up today.
Premier Hatfield, another area of contention between Maine and other...
Notice how journalists always focus on the difficulties.
We're trying to resolve difficulties. By bringing them up, they get resolved. But I understand that the the lumber manufacturers of America, of the United States, are going to be introducing legislation, or at least trying to get, what is it called, countervailing duty action against Canadian lumber imports citing unfair competition in July. I wonder, what will this do to your lumber industry as such? What is the effect of such an action?
The legislation will not pass Congress. That's my reaction to it. There is a lot of that because of the economic situation, but there will not be, in my view, support, even minimal support in Congress for this. I think that legislation was probably part of someone's election campaign in November. I think that it's not to be taken seriously, and I think we understand that. The only other thing I would like to say is that the government of Canada and the government of New Brunswick do not subsidize the export of potatoes, or what we do subsidize is, and what we do provide monies for, is to assure that the quality of New Brunswick potatoes gets much, much better, but we do not directly or indirectly subsidize potatoes. And the potato farmers have been saying that for a long time, but in Maine, but it just simply isn't true.
Well, do you see a rise in protectionism generally? Is that going to be a problem in the next few years?
Well, that's more or less a danger lurking in the background, because such pressures spring directly from economic difficulties that are understandable, are legitimate, basically. But on the other hand, since it's contradictory to the perspective we have to live with, which is what I mentioned before, the GATT agreements that were mentioned this morning, leading us towards the end of the 80s to something much closer to a sort of common market. Along the way, there may be pressures like that, and they're, I think, very understandable. But I say, like Premier Hatfield, as far as, for instance, lumbering is concerned, it's not subsidized from our end. What we do subsidize sometimes internally, which is normal, is better chances for production, is also better quality control, things like that, because after all, they're part of a good production. But nothing is done to subsidize exports that I know of.
Sorry, I have to interrupt. Thank you very much, Governor Gallen and Premier Levesque, Premier Buchanan, Premier Hatfield, and Governor Brennan. For Angus King, I'm John Greenman. Good night.
Production funds for Statewide are provided in part by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This has been a co-production of the Maine Public Broadcasting Network and WCPB 10.